Last time on the world of the Jaredites, we discussed the idea of how one culture of the Jaredites bled into the other, the Nephites, through the Mulekites, and how those who were often dissenters or people who did not believe in the way the Nephites led their lives would take on their names and traditions of the Jaredites in this subculture. We also discussed that there was hiders, people who were able to not be part of the absolute destruction that would be at the hill Cumorah. And one wonderful little gem was Clement's quote about, since he was right after the apostles and trained by the apostles in Jesus' time and area, that the dwellers on the other side of the earth and other parts of the earth's sphere which cannot be reached by anyone from these regions, none of the inhabitants dwelling there is able to get to us. He calls those areas worlds when he says, "The ocean is not to be crossed by men, but those worlds which lie on the other side of it are governed by the same ordinances, literary dispensations, of a guiding and directing God as these." So even probably the apostles and extremely early church leaders at Christ's time, the Church of Jesus Christ of Meridian Day Saints, knew and believed in the idea of people on the other side of the world receiving the same blessings and understanding about Jesus Christ as they have. The other sheep I have, which are not of this fold, that we love to explain. All right, but let's continue on. So now we've got the idea that there was kind of a mixed culture, and that not all the Jaredites were totally destroyed, that it's a terrible way, too simplistic way of thinking to sit there and think that the only people who were ever on these continents were just the ones that were mentioned in the Book of Mormon, and that's it. And here we go. Men out of Asia. But why all this insistence on the possible survival of a few Jaredite escapees prowling in the woods? Because it would take no great number of such renegades to perpetuate upon the face of this north country the ways of the Jaredite nomads and hunters. We have said that when the Asiatics hide in the mountains and in the woods, their way of life becomes just like that of the Indians. Indeed, Professor Grauset can think of no way of life so perfectly like that of the scattered and disorganized tribes of Asia after the destruction of the great nations than that of the North American Indians at the time of their discovery by the whites. And what is more natural than that conditions in the North Country, littered with the bones and haunted by savage hunters, should present after the passing of the Jaredite nation just the sort of wreckage and savagery that make the Asiatic scene after the passing of the empire. In time, descendants of Jaredite hunters and robbers would combine with Lamanite riffraff, as their ancestors did with the Mulekites, and the old Jaredite stock would survive, like the Nephite, as a mixture only. 1 Nephi 13:30. But the ways of the Jaredite hunters, perfectly adapted as they were to conditions of life in this north country, would not only hold up their own, but remain predominant. This complicates the picture considerably, but for that matter, the anthropologists themselves now begin to detect just such complications in their own picture, as Gladwin has shown us with much spirit and wit. We need not discuss the well-known affinities between the North Americans and the hunters of Asia: shamans, mounds, peace pipes, scalping, wigwams, and all that. Contacts between the natives on the Asiatic and American shores of the far North Pacific still take place, but that is strictly a local phenomenon. It is the reality, ancient Asiatic background of the Indians that interests me. In a recent study on the rise of the ancient state in Central Asia, I drew evidence equally from the American ethnologists and the Old World sources, and it all fitted neatly into a single picture. But whatever connection there might have been between the Asiatics and the Indians, save for those maddeningly obvious ties with the Near East to which Gladwin draws attention, must have been a very early one indeed, for the Asiatic languages are among the most conservative and widespread on earth. And if the two worlds had been in contact anywhere near as recently as certain authorities believe, the Asiatic nature of the Indian languages should be instantly recognizable. To date, no one has been able to recognize those languages as those of the Asiatic steppes. Now, all this is as the Book of Ether would have it. That account tells us that at the very dawn of history, many thousands of years ago, a party of nomad hunters and stock raisers from West Central Asia crossed the water, very probably the North Pacific. I appreciate his intelligence and all the things he's expert in. I'm perfectly fine in saying, okay, I get it. I still think they went over the Atlantic, but we'll continue. Very probably the North Pacific to the New World, where they preserved the ways of their ancestors, including certain savage and degenerate practices, and carried on a free and open type of steppe warfare with true Asiatic cruelty and ferocity. It tells us that these people moved about as much in the wilderness for all they built imposing cities, and that they produced a steady trickle of outcasts through the centuries. A careful study of the motions of Jaredites, Mulekites, Nephites, and Lamanites should correct the absurd oversimplification by which the Book of Mormon as a history is always judged. It will show as plain as day that the Book of Mormon itself suggests the Asiatic origin of some elements, at least, of the Indian race and culture long before the anthropologists got around to it. The scientists no longer hold that one migration and one route can explain everything about the Indians. Remember that, again, if you oversimplify history, you're wrong. And in our schools, they often say that Native Americans, or the population of all of America, came over during ancient times when you had the Bering Strait and the last ice age, that kind of stuff. And I think quite conclusively, with him talking about the other civilizations that were an influence on both Lehi and the Jaredites, he's quite shown that that's not the way life works. It's not this evolutionary type BS. It's very sudden, and then often it dangles and can reset or walk backwards even. Anyway, so when he's referring to, they no longer believe that it's just one migration from the Bering Strait, which even I was taught, and that was in the 90s. And they probably still kind of, unfortunately, I doubt our schools have advanced much since then. In fact, I think they've degenerated a heck of a lot. So I doubt that, talking about First Peoples here in America, that they actually get into deeper explanations other than the Bering Strait, and then maybe some other things left over that, like, oh, they fractured, and it's like, yeah, wouldn't it be nice if they actually had decent... Anyways, I'll shake my head and move on. The scientists no longer hold that one migration and route can explain everything about the Indians. The Book of Mormon never did propound a doctrine so naive, though it comes to us a digest and an abridgment, stripped and streamlined. It is still as intricate and complex a history as you can find, and it is involved and tragic pages. Let me read that again. It is still as intricate and complex a history as you can find, and in its involved and tragic pages, nothing is more challenging than the sinister presence of those fierce and bloody-minded men out of Asia, known in their day as Jaredites. Whew. All right, here we go. The big picture. So this is where he's going to start wrapping things up. I'm pretty sure. My dear and patient F. I'm wondering if this is Fawn Brody. Because remember, Fawn Brody was the one who originated the No Man Knows My History, which was crap in the way of actual history. And Hugh Nibley put the smack down on that. I mean, it was bad. It was really bad. And if Fawn Brody, I believe, was also the same one who started the whole idea that it was Thomas Jefferson who had relations with one of those slaves when he was actually over in France at the time, and so he could not have sired the child that came from the slave, wherein his philandering brother, though, was. So the slander against Thomas Jefferson runs deep, and I think it originated with Fawn Brody. And so I'm wondering when he's writing to my dear patient F, I'm wondering if it is Fawn Brody or if it's another friend of his. We'll see. The time has come to draw a few conclusions. If you will recall, I set out to prove that certain strange and unfamiliar things described in ether could have taken place as described because they actually did take place, characteristically and repeatedly in all those cultural areas in which, according to the Book of Mormon, the Jaredites acquired their culture and civilization. Among such strange and unfamiliar things, we mentioned the Valley of Nimrod, the confounding of the languages, the great wind, desert, and the flooded plains of the Old West, while in the New, our list includes such items as the great assembly of the nation, the drawing off of followers by bribes, oaths, by heaven and earth, secret societies, kings and prisons, fine work done in prisons, the dancing princesses. That was another one that I found fascinating. Whew. Strange breeds of animals, plagues of serpents, great national hunts, and special hunting preserves, the nation in arms, peculiar strategy and tactics, the formation of armies by forced recruiting, systematic terrorism, the rule of robber bands, wars of extermination, regarded as personal duels between rival rulers with the ritual survival of the king. The list of bullseyes is a long one, and if it is not as long as Lehi's, it is because ether takes fewer shots. First Nephi, which covers the 8 years, can devote much more attention to detail, and at an if possible, even more difficult target. His percentage of hits is no less staggering. Individually, I find the parallels between the Jaredites and the early Asiatics very impressive. But taken together, their value increases as the cube of their number. That's raised to the third, if you're following. Sorry. I was having talked about modern schools that make me shake my head. That's why I felt the necessity to say that. Anyway. In the Book of Ether, they are woven into perfect organic whole, a consistent picture of a type of society, the very existence of which has come to be known only in recent years, and which is quite different from that Indian culture into which it later developed. How beautifully integrated this short history is. There is a great calamity, a confusing and confounding of peoples and tongues, a general scattering in many directions, from a point somewhere to the north of Mesopotamia, then a migration into unknown lands covered with swamps and lakes, and dank remnants of the last ice age, then tremendous winds that overtake the party just as they set sail. Some years after their landing in the New World, they hold a general assembly and choose a king. His son, in time, rebels and inaugurates centuries of bitter warfare, ending eventually in a war of extermination, with odd survivors lurking in the woods and deserts. Numbers, distances, and times all fit together perfectly, but the sort of thing that can be most fully checked and is virtually impossible to fake is, as I have often insisted, the sort of thing that was done and the way it was done. And note, he emphasized that. He says, I have often insisted the sort of thing that was done and the way it was done. It is the big picture that is really impressive. But our main purpose in writing these letters, if you will think back to the first one, was to refute the Einheitstheory. Einheitstheory of a single beginning. Sorry, I don't know what that noise was. Sorry, I've never come across the word. It sounds Germanic. Personally, it sounds like a mix between Einstein and theory, but Einheitstheory of a single beginning, I think that's what it means. The single beginning for the origin of the Indians. Since you protest that the Book of Mormon was oversimplifying the story, I think by now it should be apparent that the Book of Mormon account is not as simple as it seems. Ether alone introduces a formidable list of possibilities, few of which have ever been seriously considered. Foremost among these is the probability, accounting almost to certainty, that numerous Jaredites survived in out-of-the-way places of the North to perpetuate a strong Asiatic element in the culture and blood of the American Indian. To write a history of what could have happened at the very beginning of recorded history would have been as far beyond the scope of any scholar living in 1830 as the construction of an atom bomb would have been. Yeah. The portrait of, constructing this accurate of a history for someone in the 1830s, like, again, the 1920s was a big, huge push of anthropological, archaeological discovery in all sorts of areas. See Egypt. I am curious, because I'm not a very good historian, how many British museum pieces were brought back during which times? When did the accumulation of historical artifacts become a great obsession for the museums and collectors of the world? I wonder if it's in the 1920s. That's 100 years after Joseph Smith. So, anyways, yeah, I can just sit here and think of Joseph Smith trying to construct an atom bomb. It's like, yeah. The portrait of the first great states of antiquity is only just taking shape in our own day, and the idea of the original Asiatic nucleus of all civilization was undreamed of a few years ago. Our own ideas will have to be revised continually on many points, but the main outlines of the picture are firm and clear, and it is the same picture that meets us in the Book of Ether. One of the most surprising discoveries of recent years has been the revelation that whenever the experts search in Babylon, Thebes, Ras Shamra, Central Asia, or the Far East, they are met at every period of history by an almost unbelievable mix-up of physical and linguistic types. Sorry, there was a footnote here that I want to read. After he quoted two different books, he says, if the reader will examine the culture map of Asia published in Life magazine for December the 31st of 1951, pages 8 and 9, he will notice that the editors have placed the beginning of civilization in the mountains to the north and east of Mesopotamia, with the main focal points in the great valleys immediately north of the plain of Shinar. This is in strict accordance with our own conclusions based on the Book of Ether. So, interesting. Considering, I think this was copyrighted in 1953. He may have been writing it in 1952, so I'm wondering if his premises and conclusions were influenced by that article or what. But it fits, one way or another. So the mix-up of physical and linguistic types,
As the biological picture becomes more complex, the cultural one seems to become more simple, the whole civilized world at any moment of its history seeming to share in a general sort of way in a single common world civilization. This is also the picture we get in Ether, where the nations and tribes are already thoroughly confounded. In Jared's day, while certain institutions and practices are described as being common to the ancients as a whole and as flourishing among all nations. Consistent with this picture is the fact that a number of Jaredite names are also Bible names. You ask in your last letter how that can be if the Jaredite language was the lost Adamic tongue. In the first place, let us make it clear that the language of Jared was not the Adamic language at all. Jared asked that his language be not confounded, so that his people might continue to understand each other, not because it was a unique or perfect language, or the sacred language of Adam, a thing which would certainly have been mentioned if it were so. Indeed, after the Jaredites had made their getaway and their language was safe, the Lord told the brother of Jared, "The language which ye shall write I have confounded." See Ether 3:24. So again, yeah, if you've had that assumption, I never thought about it myself personally, but if you've ever had that assumption that it was the Adamic language or a very small offshoot from that, because the brother of Jared was closer to the Tower of Babel, put it out of your mind. Not a thing. So he is absolutely putting the smack down on that. When Moroni tells of the remarkable power of the writings of the brother of Jared, he attributes the mighty words not to the genius of the language, but to a special gift from God to the writer. See Ether 12:24, or Moroni 12:24. Yeah. He doesn't quite write out it completely. I think he's doing it because it's like in succession to the quote he had before, so I think it's Ether 12:24. Anyway, as to the antiquity of writing, incidentally, we have not discussed the matter because it is still, so to speak, completely up in the air. At Uruk, where the parent forms of writing appear, they do not do so by any gradual process of evolution, but suddenly and without warning, there appear 1,500 signs and pictographs scratched on clay. They seem to have been written and used without any signs of hesitancy, showing that writing was already well established somewhere in the world, and that somewhere would seem to be in the region of north of the Mesopotamia. As to the footnote for that comes from the story of Uruk Antiquity X. On the equally sudden emergence of Egyptian writing, there's S. Shot Myth and Mythenbildung in Im Alten Egyptian, obviously a very German type book. And then he's quoting other books, so that's the only thing to know. As to Jaredite names in the Bible, the general confusion of tongues would not only allow it, but also require it. For remember that the vast majority of people who spoke the Jaredite language originally were confounded and their language contaminated, so that while the words remained, their meanings did not. Ether 134. Oh, that's an interesting insight. About 10 years ago, when we were in the midst of the whole oppression of making sure things were politically correct, to the point that everyone was changing, literally, they were changing definitions. And in some ways, it felt like they were changing definitions daily, although it was more likely monthly, and there's always precedent kind of rolling over for, a while. And then it comes into stark spotlight, the media and social media covers it, and so then now that's the thing, right? Like the progression of who or what titles of certain races you can or can't say, or the progressions or titles of how you can address people and what you can or can't say. And heck, even even technical definitions that have always been around, they were starting to be overturned. Why? To push specific narratives. For example, things like a recession, 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP. Very simple, straightforward definition. That was like your recession. Oh, that got changed. That was 5 years ago for that particular one. Or other, just recall. And you'll realize how they changed all these definitions. So during that time, that's when I was really just annoyed with the idea of why there is no good reason to change these definitions, especially since we're changing them to fit something that they're not. Hence the movie What is a Woman came out, right? When one of the most basic, fundamental absolutes in understanding and talking in the world became confounded, literally confounded, because the definition changed. The word itself didn't. The word woman had always been there. But their meaning did not. So I was sitting there pondering like this whole craziness, and I'm like, this sounds a lot like what would have happened at the Tower of Babel, except on a much faster, grander level. And funny enough, here's this point that slightly backs up my idea. So I'm focusing on it. Anyway, so the words remained and their meanings did not. We would expect then to find Jaredite words scattered about all over the old world. The only way we can trace such words, of course, is in their proper names. Few people in our society know what their names mean, though both family names and given names, almost all, once had meanings. Thatcher, Johnson, Smith. Was it Tinsmith, Blacksmith? Wright. What about Wainwright? Or Wheelwright? You know, as a few examples when he's talking about surnames. The Johann's son, etc. son, or there's a bunch of Germanic ones that I wouldn't know because I'm not very German. Now, at least. My dad might know. He went on his mission in Germany. He might have an idea what a bunch of the German surnames were. Yeah, you as you can see. Oh, a perfect example is I knew in Japanese names, you can take something that's actually quite commonly used and, you see it in America too. For example, imagine a girl named River, or a Doctor Who girl named River, or River Tam, River Song, River Forest, or what's another good one that's commonly used? Summer. Oh, I actually knew a girl in high school named Autumn. So you can have names that have actual direct normal correlations to other words. In Japan, there's a common one, Yuki, if I understand right, means snow. And what if there's a girl out there named Snow? Or Crystal? Got a lot of self-selected names that I'm sure along those same lines as well. So, there you go. So surnames are one. Few people in our society know what their names mean, though both family names and given names, almost all once, had meanings. Because of our names are the almost without exception survivals from long dead languages, having very involved and picturesque histories, such has always been the case with proper names. It is not surprising that 3 of the oldest cities in the world, one of them traditionally described as the first city in the world after the flood, all bear the good Jaredite name of Kish. Though these cities are widely separated, it is not surprising that the first king of Israel also should be named Kish. It is not surprising that a city rivaling Kish in an age of importance in Mesopotamia should be named Lagash, while one of the oldest cities in Palestine was Lachish, both recalling the Jaredite Rip Lachish, which could mean, in Babylonian, Lord of Lachish. A more remarkable coincidence is that the Jaredite king Aha was the son of Seth, Ether 110 and also 1110, since Menes, the fabled founder of the first Egyptian dynasty, bore the name of Aha, meaning warrior, and was supposed to have succeeded Seth as the ruler of the land. A good idea of how mixed up things are may be gained from considering the name of Korihor. We noted above that the name of the high priest, who in 1085 BC usurped the throne of Thebes, incidentally the oldest city in Egypt and the oldest city in Europe, both bear the name of Thebes. How come? Seemed to be identical with that of the Nephite upstart Korihor, with a K. So there's Korihor in the Book of Ether and Korihor the upstart in the Book of Mormon. But we have seen that Korihor is just as obviously identical with the Jaredite Korihor. What is the tie-up? Not in Egypt, surprisingly enough, for Herhor, or whatever it was, does not seem to have been an Egyptian name at all, although found in Egypt, but is possibly a late adoption from the Hurrian through Canaanite. That is, it comes from the original stamping grounds of the Jaredites. The Nephites can thus have got it either from the Jaredites through Mulek, or have imported it directly from their corner of the Egyptian Empire, where its Egyptian form was illustrious among the followers of Ammon. There is not a name or an event in Jaredite history that does not call for long and serious study. They merit such study because they are names and events of authentic type. As with the Lehi story, if this is fiction, it is fiction by one thoroughly familiar with a field of history that nobody in the world knew anything about in 1830. No one is going to produce a skillful forgery of Roman history, for example, unless he actually knows a good deal of genuine Roman history. So if Ether is a forgery, where did its author get the solid knowledge necessary to do a job that could stand up to 5 minutes of investigation? I have merely skimmed the surface in these hasty letters, but if my skates are clumsy, if my words are clumsy, if my skates are clumsy, the ice is never thin. Every page is loaded with matter for serious discussion that would fizzle out promptly in the face of any palpable absurdity. But nothing could be more unfair than to treat the Book of Ether simply as a history. After our long preoccupation with the sordid and secular side of Jaredite history, it is high time to remind ourselves that this text, from which we have been arbitrarily selecting for comment only those verses which might have been found in any ancient chronicle, is one of the greatest treasures that ever came to a generation of men. The sad story of the Jaredites is but a framework for the inspired commentary of Moroni, a mighty tract for our times, but more than that, for the times ahead. Go, Hugh Nibley. Bring down the spiritual hammer. Let the Holy Ghost hit like a hammer on anvil. Anyway, Moroni assures us that it is the Lord who is running things, and that men miss the whole point and meaning of their life by failing to recognize the fact. The winds have gone forth out of my mouth, and also the rains, he tells the brother of Jared. But to men it does not seem that way, for the Lord is constantly showing forth great power which looks small to the understanding of men. Men simply do not have faith, and so deny themselves the blessings and power that might be theirs. Boundless knowledge of all things that is hid up because of unbelief. Given faith, God will not withhold from us a knowledge of all things. And ironically enough, men know that they should have faith, even apart from the thought of any reward. For it persuadeth men to do good. That is true. Sorry, that hit home. You begin with hoping. Man must hope, or he cannot receive an inheritance. For faith is things which are hoped for, and not seen. Wherefore dispute not, because ye see not. For ye receive no witness until after the trial of your faith. If there be no faith among the children of men, God can do no miracles among them. For he worketh unto the children of men according to their faith. Nothing is harder than to convince a man of a thing he has not experienced. Ether did prophesy great and marvelous. I really love the subject of faith. I really, really do. I think it's one of the most important foundations anyone can ever have. And even I, with all my studying of different things and concepts that I've mulled over, and I even wrote a little bit about faith. There's parts of faith that even I don't understand. The faith that leads to actual true miracles, besides it being reliant completely on God, I don't have a real good idea of how that works. The faith that showed, the faith where it is faith is in things, is things which are hoped for and not seen. That I get. That is actually extremely important. The idea of trusting in God, in what he says about things, and about concepts of things that are true, but are intangible. The idea of justice. Can you see justice? Can you lick justice? Can you hold justice in your hand? Not in the slightest. We say that metaphorically at times, but we never actually mean it. Can you hold mercy in a bottle? Can you have mercy sound in your ear? No, there's no tangible thing as mercy. Again, we might refer to mercy as something that sounds in people's ears because of what we speak or say or teach, but that's metaphorical. The concept of mercy is intangible. Yet if you believe and have hope in these things, justice and mercy, it's just a very simple example. They change lives, individually, in families, and then as civilizations. These are huge concepts that are extremely important, yet if you don't believe in them, and if you don't have hope in them, and you don't uphold them or act according to them, then you'll never see it. You'll never will. And in the same way, when God can do no miracles among them because they don't have faith, think of all the things that, for anyone who is a believer, even if you don't have a full understanding of how or why, when people are like, God upholds all things and all your breath and the rain from heavens and all that, even if you don't have a full concept of that, or it seems kind of far-fetched, because it's like that, all things? No, there's kind of a natural order to stuff, right? Even if you're very naturalistic minded, if you have just a modicum of faith, of understanding that, well, he was the creator of all this, and you can show thankfulness in that, and you can say, you know what? Even if I don't understand how you uphold all the universe and all the little things that go on inside this realm, I can at least trust that you're there, and that you're doing it to the point that I don't even see it. Because that's true. Just like anyone else, if you want to deny the existence of God, you can deny it. You can a priori just say, nope, he's off the table. And ignore him altogether. And there's no way he could do any miracles. It could just be coincidence as a way to sweep him under the rug every time that he peeks out and shows his arm and his hand and wants to try and speak to you. Oh, it's just coincidence. Oh, it was just someone's fanciful thought. They didn't really actually see or have those experiences. That was just, I know better than them. I know that kind of stuff doesn't happen. So that's why, I could go on and on about faith and people's reaction to faith, and that's why he can do no miracles among them, because even if he did, it was just coincidence. I lament. But nothing is harder to convince of a man of a thing he has not experienced. Ether did prophesy great and marvelous things unto the people, which they did not believe, because they saw them not. Ether 12:5. Those without faith live in a world of their own, which to them seems logical and final. They take the very unscientific stand that beyond the realm of their own very limited experience, nothing whatever exists. God's works to them look small, and they will never be cured of their myopia until they are willing to face the facts and pass a test that only the honest in heart can consider without a chill of aversion. The test is this: if men will come unto me, I will show unto them their weakness. I give unto men weakness, that they may be humble. Sometimes I just want to end it like that. I give men weakness so that they can be humble. Oftentimes, we then go on to the following: then will I make weak things strong to them. I think more people love that hopeful sort. I give men weakness, and they skip over the middle part and they say, I give unto men weakness that they may be strong. No. He gives weakness to us so that we can be humble. And as we are humble, he will help us to become strong. It's kind of those paradoxical things that he says, where you have to be humble so you can be strong. You give up your life for his sake so that you can find it and keep it. All these things. He's a God of love, yet he is also a God of division. He's here to tell the truth, and it tears families apart. But he is a God of love. But he does know that by having standards, it tears people apart. There are seemingly paradoxical things that occur. But if you spend an ounce of time and effort thinking about it, it's not a paradox at all. But you have to trust in the process to actually get the results that God wants you to have. What man of the world or posturing PhD is ever going to ask for weakness? The men of the world seek for the things of the world. The realities they know, and the greatest of these are power and gain. Through the ages, the Book of Ether assures us men have sought these things as their highest goal, and have invariably made the tragic discovery that the key to control over one's fellow men, i.e. the power to gain, lies in three things: secrecy, organization, and freedom from moral scruples, especially from squeamishness in the matter of shedding blood. Of these three things, Moroni says, the Lord worketh not in secret combinations, neither doth he will that men should shed blood, but in all things hath forbidden it, from the beginning of man. These things, the prophet explains, have destroyed one civilization after another, and shall continue to destroy whatever nation shall uphold such secret combinations. We seem to be reading Thucydides? Thucy. Dides. Thucydides. Well, yeah, if it's a psi instead of a k. So, Thucydides. Thucydides. Depending on how you pronounce the vowels. So, I'm going to read it as Thucydides, who commented... we seem to read let me restart that whole sentence. We seem to be reading from Thucydides, who comments on Greek history, just as Moroni does on Jaredite. Men who live for this world only invariably become dangerous paranoiacs who destroy themselves and all connected with them. But the Greeks never showed us the other side of the picture. It is here that the Book of Ether far surpasses all other commentaries on human history. The greatest of Greeks taught us, wrote Goethe, that life on this earth is a hell. Farther than that they could not go. But the Book of Ether teaches us that life on this earth can be heaven, that here actually have been many before Christ came who could not be kept from within the veil, but truly saw with their eyes the things which they had beheld, with an eye of faith, that they were glad. Here we are not dealing with the usual platitudes and truisms to the effect that if men would only behave themselves and help each other, that they would have no troubles, and have always known that, only too well. Ether shows us human society divided into two groups, not the good and the bad as such, but those who have faith and those who do not. They live in totally different worlds. One group, in a real heaven, are shown just what kind of world the faithless make for themselves to live in. This is Moroni's tract for our times. A generation ago, the doings of that grim and bloody maniacs of the Asiatic steppes were as far removed from the thought and experience of Western man as the other side of the moon. Today, the eerie nightmare has become our own history, and we are met in the news with photographs of American commanders striking the appalling attitudes and sporting the huge ear flaps and quilted jackets of ancient Khans of the steppes. Who would have dreamed of such a thing? On the other side of the picture, we have the Lord himself speaking in all humility. What commentary on humility? To any man who is ready to receive him. The Jaredites were not Israelites, or even the seed of Abraham. They were simply human beings. Apparently, a nondescript body of no particular racial affinity. Time and place cease to exist in this story, for many men of whom we have no record spoke face to face with the Lord long before he came to fulfill his earthly mission. This remarkable indifference to any quality but faith is carried in ether, even into the next world, where we learn that the Lord has prepared among the mansions of his Father a house for man, Ether 12:32, where the faithful of this earth shall be at home among the faithful of other worlds. Thus the bonds of time and place are completely dissolved in Moroni's theology, and the same promises and warnings that hung over the world of the Jaredites are handed on to our own world. In closing, let me point out that it is in the Book of Mormon, specifically in Ether, that we read about things beyond the veil of other worlds than this. Many mansions, among which the faithful of this world inherit but one, and of men who talk with Jesus Christ face to face in visions. All this I find published in 1830, when Joseph Smith was but 24 years old, and the church was not yet organized. Yet some of my intellectual friends are even now knocking themselves out to show that all such ideas were the product of Joseph Smith's later thinking, and that the idea of anything like his first vision was first worked out by a committee in Nauvoo in 1843. There is nothing like the story of the Jaredites to show us that the gospel is as timeless as it is true. If the historical part of the Book of Ether were to be put forth to the world as the translation of some text found, let us say, in the cave of the 1,000 Buddhas, the experts on early Asia might think it a work of fiction, but would find nothing in it, barring the strange proper names, to make them doubt that it reflected a genuine ancient culture. If you want to be very cautious, you might say there is very little in it that would annoy the expert. But bearing in mind that Asiatic studies are still in embryo, and considering the condition under which this work was published, and the fabulously remote probability of the writers getting anything right at all, I think no further credentials are necessary to establish the authenticity of the book, which repeatedly claims to be reporting the ways of very early Asiatics. The Book of Ether, like 1 Nephi, rings the bell much too often to represent the marksmanship of a man shooting at random in the dark. Next is the appendix. I will leave the appendix as the last reading tomorrow. I think he ended on a very perfect note. I think it's a very, very interesting and reflective book. And one that I think that's a very good point, that the Jaredites, they hadn't established the lineage of Abraham yet. And God dealt with them directly. The Book of Mormon in its entirety shows that the divisions of people into those who believe and those who don't believe, even if they are important for a time to preserve those who want to believe, God wants to deal with all his children, even those who are wicked, even those who don't have the full knowledge of truth. Remember, the Nephites became more wicked than the Lamanites at the end. I think that's a warning to any believer anywhere. It's extremely important. When I read the Bible, I have a streak of fatalism in me. If you haven't if you couldn't tell already. And the streak of fatalism that I have is the idea that if we're supposed to be the chosen ones, we're the ones we need to watch out for the worst. Everyone that has the fullness of information about the gospel and about the truth have the greatest potential to be the worst of humanity. Look at the people in the antediluvians, the ones who became the watchers. They were the sons of God. They knew the fullness of the gospel. They became the watchers, and then they became the great men of the plains. They became the ones to spread the wickedness, secret combinations, and terrible elements of population control through force and more horrific things than that. They were the ones who were supposed to be good. You look at the children of the people who are the promised people of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Here's Abraham living in a world that, again, had devolved out of the land of Babel into all these different civilizations. And then he specifically lives in an Egyptian type background that had turned away from truth and to human sacrifice and idols. And here Abraham becomes a friend to God through trying those different gods and showing that, idols suck and are stupid. And then he wrestling with God. Metaphorically, but there's also, one who wrestles with God later in the Bible. But anyways, Abraham actually speaks with and makes covenants with God to follow him. And so you have him gaining the promise that the Messiah would come through him and his lineage. He was a great prophet. So he has Isaac, his son, and he's asked to sacrifice his son. And if you believe Jonah Barnes and his Apocrypha, he totally sacrifices him like true deadly dead, and then helps him to be revived. On the other hand, if you don't believe that, that's perfectly fine. There's a few scriptures here and there that talk about giving an escape, like Isaac was given an escape. So you can have two working theories, and either one can give you some very good information spiritually that way. So then you have Isaac, who had enough faith, who was probably in his 20s or 30s, to be willing to be sacrificed because he knew that God was God over life and death, as well as all the universe. So he earns his rank in the pantheon of righteous patriarchs. And then you have Isaac, it was between Jacob and Esau. You have the return of the garment of Adam. And then
Jacob gets it. He goes off and does his own thing, gains a big family, and that's the start of the 12 tribes of Israel. But throughout all of this, having to deal with family members and civilization in there, there's a lot of crap that's going on. It's messy. It's very, very messy. And considering there was probably a bunch of editing, there's several things that I'm sure we're not very good at. And frankly, we get kind of the nasty, dirty parts of history on them. Because, if you have no problem with apocryphal sources, which one of these days I'll have to get around to, I'm really interested in Jubilees and the, I can't remember if he said it was contained in it or not, but there's the prophecies of the 12 patriarchs. So the heads of the 12 tribes of Israel each give prophecies according to their children about what's their role in the history of the world are, which is fascinating because, you look at the history that's in the Bible account, and it's kind of messy. They were not nice to Joseph, and Reuben and others did not great things to their neighbors. And, by our standards, we could sit there and go, eeh. By their standards, it's like, well, I get where they're coming from. Probably not the best way of doing things, but I get where they're coming from, right? It's not as bad in historical context, but nowadays we're always like, yeah, I can't believe they did that. And it's like, dude, did you live back then? So when you look at it, all this whole idea of children of Israel being these promised ones, to me is always a big warning, because they are supposed to be the ones that carry the light of the gospel, and most importantly, like the promise was the Messiah would come through the lineage. And you follow that lineage, some of it be crazy, like straight up crazy. And you're like, that's the ancestors of Jesus? Really? Okay. But to me, God wants all his children to be with him. And if you are someone who actually has the fullness of the gospel, it should be a big warning, because look at all the examples that you've had throughout. The children of Israel did not stay true. They did some pretty crazy stuff. I personally really, really subscribe to the idea that is shown by Dave Butler and Jonah Barnes, and that the idea that the Josian reforms, the Deuteronomy reforms, ripped out the Messiah from the Bible. It becomes very clear when you understand in the Book of Mormon how often Jesus Christ and his knowledge shows up. Heck, in Ether, before there was Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Jesus deals with the brother of Jared directly. He is the Messiah. He is God of the whole world for all the children of the Heavenly Father. He's Jehovah of the Old Testament, Jesus Christ of the New. He's there. So it's just really plain that he is trying to deal with us all if we will hearken to him. And if we don't, if we have the truth and we don't hearken to it, and we don't stand up for it, and we don't carry it to those who need it, we are in danger of falling away ourselves. And more importantly, if we do fall away, we could become the worst of humanity. We can be the people that try and draw people away from God altogether. We can be the people that introduce more evils in this world that cause greater destruction than we can imagine. So, yeah. Sorry to end it on that note, but that's always what I like to think about, is that you've got two sides to the coin. You're the one in the control pilot. You can land that baby and get everyone home safely. You can get everyone to the celestial kingdom as safely as possible through your actions, or you can just go on a tear and just make life miserable for everybody with the knowledge and abilities that you have as someone who knows that they have knowledge and ability. So hopefully, as Hugh Nibley pointed out, you come to the understanding that All of this points to the idea that God loves us, and that if you are true to the covenants that God gives you, He'll uphold you and bless you and give you heaven on earth, as long as you have faith in the precepts that God gives. And that if you don't, well, there's another sort of world out there, and He doesn't want you to be a part of that. So truly, may God be with you.